Now here you go again. You say you want your freedom. Well, who am I to keep you down? It's only right that you should play the way you feel it. But listen carefully to the sound of your loneliness, like a heartbeat drives you mad. In the stillness of remembering what you had and what you lost and what you had and what you lost. Oh, thunder only happens when it's raining. Players only love you when they're playing. Say women, they will come and they will go.
Hi everyone. We'll get started shortly. We're going to allow a few more minutes for people to join. If you'd like, please go ahead and drop what county or organization you're with in the chat. We can all Hi Brooke, hi Scott, hi Carol. Good note, thank you, Eric. Hopefully that music is a little bit better. I can also speak a little louder. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for saying hello in the chat. We're excited for you all to be here. We're probably going to start around a couple minutes after, just to make sure we allow for everyone to make it here on time. Hey Joyce, hi Kayla, Raymond. Hey Julie, hi Cousin. Wait, 30-ish more seconds. Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We're really excited for you to be here. We have a great webinar for you today. We're going to be speaking on social marketing best practices to address youth cannabis prevention. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services.
All right. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Social Marketing Best Practices for Youth Cannabis Prevention Training. My name is Anna Meyer, and I'm an overdose prevention specialist here at the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. My role at the department involves working on our substance use disorder grant program, which is a state authorized program that's funded by taxes on the retail sales of non-medical cannabis here in Missouri. The SUD grant program aims to provide accessible community grants that support and expand services relating to SUD prevention, recovery, and treatment, with the overarching goal of improving health outcomes and reducing the prevalence of SUD and drug-related harms, including overdose. So for more information about the grant program, I invite you all to please email our program email address, which I will share in the chat here shortly. You can use this email to be added to our serve list for updates or to ask any questions you may have. But aside from the SUD grant program and looking towards the training today, another important aspect of my job at the department involves participating in cannabis prevention and education initiatives. So this training is intended to serve as a precursor for our upcoming statewide campaigns, which will focus on cannabis prevention education. The campaigns will provide Missourians with accessible, scientifically accurate, and reliable information to enhance understanding of the risk associated with cannabis use among both youth and adults. And the key messaging will be based on scientific evidence explaining how cannabis can impact health and wellness, particularly concerning brain development in young people and its effects on youth mental health. Then additionally, the campaigns will promote safe, legal, and responsible cannabis use to help educate Missourians about the evolving landscape of cannabis legalization so that they can make informed decisions regarding use and consumption and exposure, ultimately preventing those potential health issues and mitigating harm. So today's training is going to cover a variety of communication and messaging strategies tailored for adolescents and young adults regarding cannabis use prevention. So thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate it. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our two presenters from the Rescue Agency, Kristen Isaac and Sarah Grace.
Thank you, Anna. I will go ahead and kick us off. And again, thank you all so much for being here and joining us. So today we are really looking forward to sharing with you a lot of the work that we're doing at Rescue Agency to make healthy behaviors easier and more appealing, in particular with the lens of cannabis prevention and underage adolescent use. My name is Kristen Isaac. I'm the Vice President and Group Management Director overseeing all of our cannabis control programs. And I work very closely with Sarah Grace, who is our Cannabis and Substance Prevention Senior Account Manager. And she is also the chair of our Latino Audience Division. So we're really looking forward to sharing with you all of the important work we're doing in this space and sharing as much feedback as we can to make this hopefully applicable and helpful in your day-to-day work. So looking ahead and just really wanting to take a moment to introduce Rescue Agency to you and who you are. We've spent over 23 years working to make healthy behaviors easier and more appealing. We work with Missouri Department of Health on a number of different initiatives, including all of our vaping cessation work, some youth engagement and policy work, and the forthcoming cannabis prevention work, and specifically this training. And we also work with a number of government agencies and nonprofits across the country, over 30 different states, in fact, to create behavior change campaigns that address challenges like tobacco and vaping prevention and cessation, substance misuse education, suicide prevention and mental health support, nutrition and physical activity education, government health benefits. And you can learn all about us on our website at rescueagency.com. So, as I just mentioned, Rescue's been at the forefront of public health for over 2 decades. And when we started in 2001, we were really driven by this insight that a lot of the traditional PSA campaigns out there were preaching to the choir, with this one-size-fits-all message, missing this really key opportunity to reach teens who are the most at risk. And that realization and vision led us to define ourselves as a behavior change agency before a lot of other health agencies really even existed. So to date, we have supported and continue to support a number of states in their journey to navigate the complexities of cannabis and the nuance of cannabis. And that includes everything from legal education, health harms, community impact, personal well-being and safety, down to supporting the very regulatory considerations that we know is incredibly active and real for a lot of the different regions who are going through this as a whole. And of the states that we work with, some have legalized recreationally, some are years out from doing so. So this is just a snapshot of all the different initiatives that we have been working within cannabis prevention specifically, everything from youth prevention to parent education, retail messaging, and really helping communities who tend to be the most disproportionately impacted by the harms of cannabis use. And ultimately, what this webinar really aims to do is just synergize all the different learnings that we've acquired in our work to bring helpful tips and resources for you all. So, when we look at the national context of cannabis, the landscape in the US, as many of you know, I'm sure, remains very in flux. So, we have states that have legalized recreational cannabis, we have states that have permitted the medicinal use. But despite all of this, it is still a Schedule I substance federally, meaning no accepted medical use and high abuse potential. So, while there have been conversations at the national level to reclassify cannabis, this lack of clarity from the national and the federal level down to the very local regions in which are grappling with the complexities of cannabis, it has created a lot of inconsistent guidelines and a lot of misinformation, confusion, lack of really clear compliance when it comes to what cannabis industry and cannabis companies are allowed to market and how they're allowed to market to youth. So as public health professionals, really our objective here is to identify how we as advocates can bridge these gaps with clear factual communication to protect our communities. Because the reality is that no matter the regulatory framework in a given state, we are working with a legacy of conflicting messages about cannabis, which makes it really difficult to protect our communities. So, the mixed messages that we have seen over time, over decades around cannabis, they don't just complicate the conversation, they make it really difficult to establish a clear starting point for our public health efforts, which we're going to talk about today. So, to understand why this challenge exists, I want to just do a quick review of how we got here. This might be repeat information and it might be new information. So we'll go through it pretty quickly. So really what I want to do is just ground us in this history of conflicting messages within cannabis. So back in the 1930s, there were a lot of fear-based campaigns that portrayed cannabis as dangerous, and it drove criminalization and generational stigma that still exists today, and a lot of policies which disproportionately targeted marginalized communities. Then over time, starting in the 60s and 70s, cannabis started to evolve into this form of a rebellion. So cannabis became this counterculture symbol, but the war on drugs really started to intensify the enforcement. It deepened the inequities that we continue to grapple with, and it reinforced a lot of stigma that still exists within cannabis. So, starting in the 90s, we started to see a continued evolution with cannabis being approved as medicinal, which, of course, legitimizes the use of cannabis for managing pain and other conditions. And this has marked a shift in public perception, but we're still dealing with inconsistent laws and enforcement practices that are leaving a lot of folks navigating outdated policies and lingering stigma. Yes, Raymond, exactly. Reefer madness. And then as we started to get into the 2010s, starting in 2012, really is where we started to legalize recreational use and normalizing cannabis use, which creates new opportunities in some ways. But the industry still faces a lot of significant challenge. So there's the barriers to entry, there's those harmed by past policies and the struggle to, figure out and identify how can we actually make this helpful to the communities that have been the most harmed. And the unregulated advertising is perhaps the common denominator here, because what we continue to see is something that we have seen time and time again within the tobacco control space is that the unregulation or the dysregulation of advertising can create a targeting mechanism that really targets vulnerable populations, and that further complicates our efforts within public health. So, looking ahead, it's clear that we are working from this foundation that requires both clarity and adaptability. And what we really, sorry, I'm just sweeping up here. Sorry, I'm just catching up, Sarah. Because we are operating from a deficit of trust. But the good news is that we can shift the conversation around public health, because science is one of the most powerful tools that we have for reshaping perceptions and conversation around cannabis. Within our research, we've seen firsthand how pairing much needed education and facts can actually apply to someone's life and provide them with tailored communications and tailored education that can replace a lot of the stigma that still exists today. Because when people get the facts and they see these facts in the context of their lives and the things that they care about, we can help them make better decisions. So ultimately, what we really want to do here is shift our focus from our audience's perspective from this is what I think you should do. For example, we don't want you to use cannabis. Your brain is developing until the age of 25 when we're talking to youth, and that is really where kind of the just say no type message comes in. But what we really want to do is flip that a little bit, right? So we want to ask the question, what do they think, right? Why aren't they already making that decision? And we want to help people understand this is why I believe that refraining from cannabis use until I am older or of legal age is right for me. Because when people make decisions based on their own values and they are empowered by this clear and relevant information, we can fade that stigma and we can empower our audiences and our youth to make informed choices that are informed by science. And this is really where the difference lies in how we can unravel the legacy of stigma in cannabis messaging, because there's ultimately two different approaches that we can take within public health, right? So you have behavioral awareness and you can have behavior change. And we're really going to spend this webinar focusing on behavior change, but it's really important to understand the difference so we can understand, again, that starting point. So on the next slide, you'll see all of the different things that you can look for and flag in a behavioral awareness campaign. It's often a starting point in a lot of different messages that we see within public health. It's all about helping people understand the risks, recognizing the facts, and seeing this picture of what could happen. But behavioral awareness campaigns prioritize that communication of the harm over the actual behavior change that we aim to achieve, right? They aim to spread a message, not necessarily drive action. It's like handing someone a brochure and expecting them to make a life-changing decision. It just doesn't work that way. People need to think, they need to process, they need to understand how a specific action or something in their life can actually fit in a seamless way. So when we think about campaigns like Got Milk, all of these catchy and attention-grabbing ads, they don't actually explain the benefits of milk, right? So it's one of the reasons why that campaign, unfortunately, did not do a great job in succeeding. And so what we really want to make sure that we understand is this difference between mass visibility and harm as a message, and really understand what we need to be doing differently to create true behavior change. So let's take a little known example from the 1990s. Rachel Lee's Cook, This Is Your Brain on Drugs. I grew up in the era of Nancy Reagan and the Just Say No era. And this ad, I very clearly remember. It was dramatic, it was memorable, it was widely recognized. But the question still stands is, did it actually make a difference? Because it was a high visibility segment, high visibility content, but it oversimplified a really complex issue, and it does not address the real barriers or root causes of substance use. So for high risk youth who tend to be disproportionately affected by underage substance use, what we see here is a fear-based message that can miss the mark, and it can fail to actually drive meaningful behavior change within the audiences that we aim to serve. So I think there might be a video here. Oh, okay. So not a video, but just another example here that we're going to share with you that is a video. This is an example of a behavioral awareness campaign out of Australia. And we'll go ahead and give this a watch and we can unpack it a little bit more.
Jason, could you pass the salt, please, darling? Jason, the salt.
Stone of sloth.
So here's the thing with this campaign. It achieved mass behavioral awareness. It went viral, but it went viral for all of the wrong reasons. So, and we've seen this scenario play out time and time again. An agency produces this really beautiful, high quality creative. I don't know if I would call this beautiful, but really, creating something without a deep understanding of unintended consequences. So, the infamous stoner sloth has now actually evolved into a symbol of pro cannabis norms, and it backfired. So instead of resonating with the audience, it became a joke. It undermined the credibility of the actual message, and it perpetuated dangerous stigma that already exists within cannabis use. It was not realistic, it's shameful, it lacks science or basic information, and it's extremely demotivating. And I think, just again, further reinforcing the idea too that cannabis is also used for medicinal use. Imagine someone who's also using cannabis and seeing themselves for medicinal purposes and seeing someone depicted like this in an ad. So, again, that is an example of behavioral awareness and not true behavior change. Behavior change, on the other hand, is where the real work happens. And because it's not enough to simply just raise awareness, what we really want to do is understand the why people make the decisions that they do. So we're looking at tools and context and motivation that helps our audience make informed choices that stick. And this goes beyond just highlighting the risks and the facts. It's really about showing people how to navigate the obstacles they face based on their unique circumstances and beliefs that frame their decisions. And it's going to help them navigate those decisions and empower them to take action. So, where do we go from here? So, our first step that we're really going to focus on is rebuilding trust with teens. It's critical in our campaigns that we are coming from a place of trust. We know how complicated it is right now. And because of this legacy of conflicting information, we are starting from a deficit of trust. So behavior change can occur, and it can only occur if we change the way we're speaking to our audiences. So, what we really want to aim to do here is remove stigma and shame from our messaging. We want to educate youth on the science that exists and do so in a way that doesn't feel exaggerated, but instead meets youth where they're at. And we also want to be empathetic towards all the different scenarios and drivers that could be contributing towards cannabis use. So, big picture, what we want to do is shift our approach from this legacy of misinformation and ads that really have, harnessed shame and cliches and judgment or confusion. And instead, we want to create messaging and forums that are empathetic, that they are credible, based with the existing science. They're open and authentic to the lived experiences of the audiences that we serve. And we want to make sure that they are timely. So, in other words, how do we go from weed is bad and therefore you are bad to weed can harm the things that you care about and your brain is growing and that is amazing. And we want to show you how this can affect you. So, we've done, as I mentioned before, a lot of work within the space. We work with teens every single year, and we are in focus groups and doing research with thousands of teens across both vaping and cannabis and poly use. And the common things that we hear when we're talking to youth about why you want to use marijuana, and these are just some of the things that we hear fitting in with friends, norms. An increasing amount of teens are turning to cannabis and substances for dealing and grappling with mental health, stress and anxiety, and escapism. And what we really want to focus on is why most youth want to use weed. And most youth want to use marijuana to feel good, to cope with challenges, and to escape. So that is really where our problem lies, right? So teens associate marijuana and using cannabis with bonding with friends, managing their emotions, and escaping from the outside world. But what we know as public health advocates and looking at the science is that cannabis can harm their growing brain and impact the things that they care about. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this big idea and we're going to use, I love acronyms. So we're going to use this acronym called SCOPE. And what we really want to do is make sure that all of our messaging, our whole approach in youth prevention is within SCOPE. And so we want to make sure that the information that we're presenting is science-based. We want to make sure that it's presented in a neutral, factual way. We want to make sure that the messengers are credible. So we look at near peer sources, those with influential lived experience, and not authority figures telling someone what to do and kind of like wagging the finger. We want to make sure that we're open. So telling the whole honest story and empowering teens to make their own decision. We want to make sure that our messages can also show the consequences of underage substance use that matter to teens, like changes to the things that they care about, like their brain function, their structure, how it can affect them within their goals and ambitions and achievements. And we also want to be really empathetic because the reality is we're in the middle of a mental health crisis. Youth are going through a lot. We hear from youth, like I mentioned, every day. And we really want to ensure that they feel understood, valued, and respected. So they are equipped and empowered to make their decisions based on the science that we are presenting them with. So what we're going to do is use all of the things that we just talked about within scope and keeping our messages within scope. And now we're going to take that a step further and we're going to think about it from the context of decision blocks. Now, every single one of us every day have a series of decisions that we need to make. We're presented with information, we process this information, and then we think about how can this fit into our life. So we're basically going to take that same methodology and we're going to use this framework that Rescue has crafted called the decision blocks framework, which really helps us analyze which blocks are in the way of trying to get the audiences we serve to take a specific behavior. So really what it does is it provides us with this multi-staged approach on how we can approach research and how we can tailor all of our communications, whether it's an ad campaign, whether it's in-person materials, whether it's a conversation, to help clear the pathway so the outcome of that health behavior really makes sense for our audience. So as I just mentioned, we have something like information blocks, like is our audience actually informed? Do they have the foundational science? Does it include, do we have the latest science? Do we have a different way of framing existing knowledge? And then we have impact. So can you envision this working within the context of your life? We hear from a lot of teens, for example, that they might use cannabis and they have no problems and they're getting straight A's. And it's really our responsibility to help them understand that despite that being their lived experience, the research still shows that it can impact the brain until your mid-20s, until that brain development is done. And then the solutions would be really helping someone who's motivated to make a change. So let's say they process the information, they've now made the decision of like, yes, I'm ready to make this change. But do they have the solution? Do they have a replacement? Do they actually see this as an achievable change that they can make in their life? And then once someone has made a change, it's about reinforcement. It's about consistency. It's about a cognitive effort that you make every single day to reinforce that decision within behavior change. So when we look at this process, there's a couple different things that we do at Rescue to make sure that all of our communications are rooted in data. And we're looking at things like open data sources and the literature that exists. We're constantly seeking out new research. And unfortunately, the research within cannabis is a little far behind because of this nuance that exists between the national and state level. But ultimately looking at whatever science we have available to help convey our points. We use formative research, so working directly with youth, working directly with the champions who are advocating for the health and wellness of our youth populations. And then we're looking at taking all of this formative research and crafting messages that we think will be really salient with our audience, and then taking it back into the field and saying, what do you think? What doesn't really stick? And does this actually shift your motivation to make a change in your behavior? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass to Sarah. I'm done with the boring stuff, I promise. Sarah has all the fun stuff to share with you, so she can walk you through our approach to teen prevention.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. So now that we've kind of gotten a background on the problem, we've learned about messages and scope, let's go ahead and take a deep dive on how we approach teen messaging and the strategies we use to effectively reach our intended audience. So we've learned about the key ways to approach our messaging. We know that in order to be credible and realistic to teens, we need to have a thorough understanding of the science to inform our messaging. So, in order to start creating tailored health communications, we need to zoom out and really ask ourselves about the key messaging objective and who our intended audience is. This is important because throughout adolescence, as the brain develops, age of initiation really matters in terms of how we tailor and target our campaign, as their influences may change as well as risk perceptions. We know that at the age of initiation, that's really important because it's going to tell us about the key messages that we need to develop. Are we preventing initiation, like trying to encourage them not to start using? Or for an older teen who's already started experimenting, are we trying to de escalate their use? Or if they're actively using, how do we discourage dependence on cannabis to cope? So, as you develop your own campaign, things like influence will be helpful as you think about the credibility of your message and the way that you need to craft your campaign to best reach teens. Um, Reach them where they're at by receiving their information about cannabis. It's important to know why they may be using weed to begin with. And also, finally, that variance in risk perceptions. We know that as teens, as they get older, they become less concerned with the harms of weed because, as you can see on this chart, teens have heavier influences in their life, and there's likely a number of confounding factors that are contributing to their use. So, keeping all of these different pieces in mind, where you start in your communication efforts really depends on those varying factors. To add another layer into your thinking, we want to reflect on what would be the ideal educational goal for your cannabis campaign. Well, there's two areas that we recommend using in your campaign efforts just to anchor our thinking. So, for example, again, are you looking to prevent that initiation for use for those younger audiences, which means focusing on getting what we call the susceptible non-trier to avoid use? Or are you looking at a teen and policy landscape that maybe would benefit from a more focus on preventing escalation of use? And this speaks to our experimenters who have already tried cannabis, and we want to aim to prevent them from becoming frequent users. So there's these two main buckets here, and for today's presentation, we will be taking a deep dive into both and showing examples on how those can come to life. So for your own goals, if it's to prevent initiation of cannabis use, then we do recommend a messaging approach that shows teens how their brain is still developing and how underage cannabis use can put that development at risk. Again, this approach focuses on getting those susceptible non-triers to avoid use or initiating in the first place. To get a little bit more granular on this, the reason why we recommend this messaging approach for this goal is because in research, we've heard from teens that around the age 13 to 14 is when they begin to initiate use. And by the age of 15, almost 45% have already started. So we know that when you're focusing on preventing initiation, that means you're probably talking to a younger teen who's open to using and starting to get curious about cannabis. In research, when we spoke to teens at this age, we learned a few really valuable insights that guided our messaging that we developed. So, teens shared with us how they are being exposed to conflicting information about cannabis. They're hearing, alarmist information from some sources, and then they go on social media and they hear from their peers or friends that cannabis isn't risky and that it's even healthy sometimes. So, if you're trying to reconcile the contradictions that they hear, we want to make sure that we are getting ahead of that and clearing that up and being the source of truth for them. We also hear that teens are trying to fit in and belong to their social groups, and this is an important aspect in the developmental stage. And they're also very receptive to statements about cannabis impact on their brain and development. They want to know the facts, they want to hear a little bit more, and they want to know the specifics. So this provides us with an opportunity to create messaging that equips teens with the early facts that they need to reconcile all that different information that they're hearing and give them a reason to say no and still belong. The supporting fact for this messaging area is around how underage cannabis use can put brain development at risk. And so the nice thing about this message area is that it really helps us elevate teens' healthy brains and can bypass coming off as fear-mongering or anti-cannabis. We're not here to demonize cannabis. We're here to show a teen that their brain development is important and that's something that they should want to protect instead of telling them, no, you just can't use cannabis because of this reason. So instead of telling them what to do, we're helping them make informed decisions with the information that they have. Next, we do have some guidance on the messaging area that are tied to the scope framework that Kristen went through earlier. So on the first note, it's all about science and focusing on the details behind the facts. And this provides the highest level of credibility with your teens. Based on our research, we found that teens do want to know the specifics and they want to feel like the information they're receiving is credible and honest. And so that's how we do that in this messaging bucket. We emphasize how the teen brain is still developing and the science about how cannabis can affect brain structure or function. And we use scientific terms to maximize that credibility. Sometimes if you're a little bit too vague, the teen won't find it as credible. At least that's what we've seen in our research. Next is to focus on that delivery that is neutral and unbiased. Teens are really good at calling out when something feels extreme or unreal, so focusing on the facts and staying objective helps with the receptiveness of the message. And lastly, we don't want to oversimplify our message. Teens appreciate those scientific terms, especially when we're explaining how THC can affect their development. We're talking about a specific process, so it's good for us to be specific with them. All right, so for our first example, I'm going to be introducing this spot on titled Brain Science. Again, this is to prevent initiation of cannabis. And for this, we took from research that we know that teens recognize weed can come with some risk, but don't internalize those risks because they don't see how that interferes with what they care about. So again, we're focusing on brain development here and how cannabis can jeopardize that. So I'm going to go ahead and play this spot for you.
There's a lot of confusion and rumors out there about marijuana. Let's clear that up with some science. Fact, our brains are still developing until age 25. And using marijuana before then can actually cause changes in our memory. That's because THC, the active chemical in weed, attaches to receptors in the hippocampus, the part of your brain that creates memories. And memory problems can affect every part of your life. So whether you vape, smoke, or use edibles, it can affect your brain all the same. Learn more marijuana science at unfazedva.com.
Right. So as we took this spot to research, it got a PE score of 3.74. And perceived effectiveness scores are a way to gauge the reactions, relatability, perception of a commercial spot. That way we know if the messaging is being effective or not. So anything considered above a 3.0 and higher is considered effective and stimulating among participants. So this is a good score. Some of the quotes that we got from research from our teens were that they appreciated that it didn't feel like they were being told what to do. It was digestible, it had factual information, and it was relatable because it's explaining to them about memory loss, things like that. And also it sounds like we really care. So this was a good example of just being straightforward with teens while not being judgmental. And it ended up being really receptive as a campaign. Here's also some examples of the supporting assets that we created. Again, really promoting, we are pro-brain, not anti-cannabis. And so this is just a quick little example of this campaign. To move forward, still staying on the brain development train, we also created this ad titled Your Amazing Brain. Similar to the one before, we're definitely trying to help teens recognize that there is risk that comes with underage cannabis use on the developing brain. And we want to show that how we can affect the specific parts of the brain that are around learning new skills and information. So let's go ahead and watch this one now.
Your brain has a natural ability to make connections at impressive speeds. In less than half a second, it can process, focus, and react to a pitch. But using weed before your mid-20s can change the way your brain functions, which could make any one of these actions harder to do. Not using weed will help your hippocampus form correctly. That's the part of the brain in charge of learning new skills. Get the real stats about weed at uncloudedmaine.com.
All right, so yeah, this was one that we made for Maine, again, staying in that avoiding initiation phase. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our next bucket of work. This is for preventing escalation. So diving into this goal, this is the messaging area that we recommend for those teens who are maybe already starting to experiment with cannabis, maybe using it a little bit more often. And so for this one, we definitely want to show that we want to show teens how underage cannabis use can impact their mental cognition with a focus on memory, in that this does get in the way of the things that they care about. So definitely building on the foundational knowledge of brain development risk. This time we're going to be focusing a little bit more on teens' goals, teens' reasons for use, and the things that the daily challenges that they feel in their life. So when we look at the data, we see that about 68% of youth who use before the age of 15 are at risk for having substance issues in their late 20s. We also know that their brains are the most vulnerable, and the more they use cannabis, the bigger the negative impact this has on their brain development. So we know that it's important to prevent that escalation. When we look at this educational goal, we see that the bullseye target for this audience is somewhere of an older teen, someone whose usage habits who begin to move away from that early experimentation that's often seen in younger audiences. So what we heard in research about this audience that really anchored and recommended our messaging is that teens don't want to lose out on more experiences and milestones. They're letting us know how greatly they value being in the moment and having new experiences, really connection to being in catch-up mode after COVID. And this is important even now, even after a few years after the pandemic, because teens are making up for what they lost, those experiences that they felt left out on. They also let us know that they care about their future and connect their success with school performance. In focus groups, we heard time and time again how school is a teen's biggest stressor. They care about how they do and the motivation they have to do well in school. They also might let us know that they might not care about school, but it's one of the biggest aspects in their life in that development stage. So for those who are saying, school's really important, they want to do well. Others said that maybe if school isn't as motivating, they still want to make sure that they are making the most of their time while they're there. And in our statement surveys, teens showed that they were very receptive to the statement about cannabis impact on memory formation specifically. So we're moving away from brain development to now memory formation. And this gives us a great opportunity to show teens the full picture about how cannabis impacts what they care about. And the fact anchored in the messaging is how THC has been shown to affect the hippocampus and impact short-term cognitive functions. So again, just some helpful guidance that are tied to the SCOPE framework is to focus on the scientific statements about cannabis impact on memories, but also take it a step further and connect the science to things that teens care about, like moving forward, doing well in school, and remembering those special moments with friends. Also empower teens to choose to avoid weed for themselves instead of telling them what to do. We know that teens like to be spoken to like adults and don't respond well to being told what to do. Also, another little helpful tip is to not tell teens that using weed will make them not connect with friends, but rather making them not be able to remember those special moments and memories they're creating. We know realistically that, teens are probably not experimenting with cannabis alone in their bedroom or being alienated. Typically, it's probably something that we see when they're out and about with friends. So telling them that cannabis use will make them miss out on that isn't really as motivating as we saw in research. To give an example of this messaging example for the preventing escalation of cannabis, let's go ahead and look at the Connect the Dots campaign. This was developed for Unfaded in Illinois, and it's a tailored health education campaign that seeks to prevent substance use among high-risk teens aged around 13 to 18 who also have a high prevalence of ACEs as well. So for this creative, we wanted to make sure that we recognize that teens care about their future success, and they often compare that success to their teens. So that was one of the motivating strategies for this messaging, and we showed that how using substances, this is a co-use campaign for cannabis and alcohol, could affect them not achieving success. So let's go ahead and watch the video now.
If you got a teen brain like me, then it's still developing, and using substances can do a grip of long-term damage. So even though drugs and alcohol affect everyone a little different, it usually goes down like this. First, you start having memory problems. Then you might start struggling at school or having a hard time getting a job. Fast forward a few years and you're 25, but nothing's really changed, except, according to a national study, your buddies who didn't frequently hit pause for substances are probably more successful than you. Connect the dots, people. Learn more about living substance-free at the website.
So for this campaign, when it went into research, it got a relatively high PE score. We had a 3.93. And also audiences felt that they appreciated the subject's directness in this spot. They felt like it was a good thing. They felt that talking directly to them would felt like it was better help. They also know they liked the format of this video as well. If you notice, it was a vertical style meant for TikTok and Reels and social media like that. So they appreciated that this message was coming on a platform that they are native to, more comfortable on. Um, and they also recognized that the messaging of the memory getting worse really stuck with them. It definitely resonated with them in this campaign. So overall, this did really, really well. Again, here's just some sample creative. And like Kristen mentioned earlier, sometimes teens do push back. And for this example, or for one of this audience said, I do drugs and I get straight A's. And I would like to point out that you are going to be getting some negative comments on things like that. You know, teens are sometimes a little combative, especially on social media, but it's really important to always redirect that misinformation or any questions or things that they have. With strong feedback, and also repointing them to the truth and or your campaign website so that way they can go and learn more. And then this will be the last example that I have for our teen section. This one is called Think Long Game. Similar to the one before, it is a co-use campaign, again, focused on teens' appreciation of moving forward and getting ahead in life. So I'm going to go ahead and show that now.
Look, bad things happen.
Here's another success key to help. Always think long game.
Say you thought you were gonna pass a class, but you failed.
You could either give up or think long game.
Think about your next move. You will have other opportunities to succeed,
When people forget that, it's easy to get stuck in a bad situation.
especially if they add in drugs or alcohol.
They can't think long game if they drunk or high.
Get more keys at hustlestrive.com.
All right. So for this campaign, it also did really, really well. Audiences appreciated that it was a softer way of trying to dissuade people from using cannabis or alcohol. Again, we're not speaking at our teens, we're having a conversation with them. And again, we're meeting them where they're at, recognizing the struggles that they have and the care that they have for school. And again, also people really related to, you know, failing the test and being, you know, peer pressured and things like that. So again, this campaign did really, really well because we're having those realistic, empathetic conversations with our teens. And again, just a quick little look at the example supporting assets. I am going to be moving us forward to the next session, and I'll have Kristen go ahead and introduce it.
Thanks, Sarah. Hope you can have a little sip of water. We've been talking for a minute, but I will help break us up a little bit because what we're going to do is switch gears. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit more around the research that we've been doing with parents and caregivers on cannabis. So the things that we've heard from our parent constituents and caregivers and those who are, you know, really trying to help youth combat underage substance use is that they do care deeply about talking to their children about cannabis use, and navigating how to have these conversations can be challenging, however, for a number of reasons. So legalization can make it more difficult for parents to explain to their children why they shouldn't be using cannabis. So some of the things that we've heard throughout a number of different states is, as you can kind of see here, is that it, you know, within California, the wrench that gets thrown in is that because there's a lot of misinformation, marijuana is legal and that's totally okay to take it. And you kind of have to remind them that it's legal if you're an adult. You are not an adult. Another one said it's tricky with the state, the legalization. It's gotten a little bit different how to approach it. It's a tough one. Um, the other piece that we continue to hear is that parents tend to feel a bit of hypocrisy if you have used cannabis in the past, for example, or if you're an active user. So some of the things that we've heard is that it's hard as a parent to use cannabis and then tell your kids not to do it because teens don't really recognize that difference between an adult and a child, and they just don't want to be seen as hypocritical. And then Ultimately, you have this kind of scenario, as you can see here in this bottom quote in the center. Being open with my own marijuana use in some ways may glorify it in a way that's like, look at dad, he's got this career, he's got a master's, he's gainfully employed. Marijuana has no effect on you, and he smoked it at an early age, so it's kind of negative, and it works for me negatively because they go, if he can do it, then we can do it. So we've definitely noticed this, and I think the other piece is just really helping parents and caregivers understand that cannabis today is very different from where it was in the 70s and 80s. The potency is so much stronger. The varieties and how you can potentially overuse cannabis is much more prevalent. So it is a completely different landscape, and that is something that we really try to ground ourselves in when we're talking about the juxtaposition between legal use, where we've been with cannabis, and then ultimately the landscape that we're looking at today. Another piece that we continue to see, and of course, again, I think it's just really hard being a youth right now. It's hard being a parent or a caregiver for youth right now. There are so many important conversations to have related to substances. And especially when we think about the spectrum of discussions that need to be had regarding substances, anything from fentanyl, but like certainly cannabis as well. And so what we've also navigated within the research that we've conducted with caregivers and parents is that it's really hard for them to navigate it and understand really how to have the conversation without feeling awkward, or they're not helping, or just out of the number of different things that they have to talk about with their child, how to prioritize this. So what we've heard from different, focus group participants is that, for example, in Illinois, I think it's best to hit it from an honest perspective and not be afraid of the answers or assume any answers ahead of time, and just to be easy peasy with it, not to underreact or overreact. Another one said they want a lot of education, they want backup, they want websites. We're going to have our ducks in a row. Knowledge is power. So giving them knowledge, letting them see everything from the perspective of that parent or caregiver to that youth, every side of it, pretty or not. So really making sure that we're kind of taking on this philosophy of equipping parents with factual information. How do we equip them, empower them, and embolden them to feel really comfortable and confident having those conversations? So, when it comes to looking at how we can help equip, empower, and embolden the parent population, some of the things, and we're going to kind of, piggyback onto that decision blocks piece that we talked about before, is just making sure that parents understand that clear science on how THC exposure can interfere with brain development and in areas like memory, learning, and impulse control. There's a lot of new science. The science is continuing to evolve. So making sure that we're using that science and providing it to parents and caregivers in a way that feels really meaningful and tailored to the needs that they have. What is that impact? So really helping parents and caregivers understand the potential for lasting cognitive and behavioral effects that could extend into adulthood. And then solutions. So we're going to be pretty solution forward when it comes to this audience and that ultimate aim of preventing underage use. So we want to provide them with guidance on how to initiate and sustain open, age appropriate conversations about the risks of cannabis use. And again, what we're going to do here is we're looking at adults of legal age who are parents. They may or may not be using, but ultimately they have a say and they have an influence on how youth are navigating their life. And if you can remember back to that spectrum of use diagram, especially within teens, and understanding that so many teens initiate use by the age of 15, caregivers and parents are the greatest influential messenger that a youth has in their life, especially in those younger years, especially before we can reach them on social media, especially before they're even on social media. And hopefully not being on social media, depending on how you look at it. So really just making sure that parents understand the role that they play in and caregivers play in navigating this landscape alongside all of the other apps that we have been exploring here. So this first example, I'll just kick us off and then Sarah will take us through the rest. This one is called Keep Trying, and it is an ad that really harnesses on the idea of don't give up. We know it's hard. Youth are busy. We understand, but we really want to encourage parents, caregivers, mentors to keep trying to talk about cannabis with their kids, even if they don't respond the right way. So let's go ahead and give that one a watch, and then I'll pass to Sarah.
Hey, can I ask you something?
It's not about all the times your teen shuts you down. It's about the times they don't. Believe it or not, you're still their biggest influence. Having ongoing conversations with your teens about the risks of cannabis cuts their chance of future misuse.
Hey, can I ask you something?
I guess.
Ask questions
How you been feeling?
and take time to listen to their experiences. Find more helpful tools at letstalkcannabis.cdph.ca.gov.
All right. So for this one, we made this for the state of California. And like Kristen was saying, it was definitely encouraging the messaging of keep trying, keep going at it. We know it's hard and sometimes teens are busy, sometimes they're not ready to listen. But as long as you keep that messaging up, you will break through. I also wanted to mention that we did create this campaign in Spanish as well for California audiences. One thing that I think is really unique about this campaign is that we hired bilingual actors to make sure that we were providing a really genuine, authentic campaign for our Spanish-speaking audiences in California. So I will also go ahead and just show you this video as well.
¿Te puedo preguntar algo?
No se trata de todas las veces que su adolescente le ignora. Se trata de las veces cuando sí le escucha. Aunque no lo crea, usted sigue siendo su mayor influencia. Hablar frecuentemente con sus adolescentes acerca de los riesgos de la marihuana ayuda a prevenir su uso indebido en el futuro.
Oye, ¿te puedo preguntar algo?
Sí, bueno.
Hable con ellos abiertamente sobre el tema y escuche lo que tengan que decir. Encuentra más recursos en marihuana.cdph.ca.gov.
So moving on to the research for this campaign, this video received a score of 3.81. This spot did really well for both our English and speaking parents in California, our participants. They appreciated the message that it's going to take having this conversation a couple times to really sink in with your kids. They felt like that was really relatable. It also gave them encouragement that if they didn't get it right the first time, that's okay, because they can always have the conversation again. We saw that it was important for them to find the right moment to talk to your kids about cannabis, and also that the message of keep trying to get through to your children was relatable. They also liked that this ad showed parents approaching the conversation together rather than it being put on one parent to handle. So they really appreciated the unity within the spot as well. And so just for some of the quotes, again, it's not just talking about drugs, but when you want to talk to them about something else, they do the same thing. They roll your eyes at you. I don't want anything right now. Leave me alone. So they really felt like the moment when it's calm and you're able to approach them from different topics. Audiences really resonated with the realistic depiction of teens for this spot as well. So moving forward to one of our other parent examples, this one is titled Awkward is Okay. This is coming from a mental health lens, and this spot empathizes with parents and mentors that having a conversation about cannabis with teens is awkward, but it's important and it shows them that it doesn't have to be perfect. So something that we learned from that first video that we saw is the encouragement for them to keep trying, but there was also some nervousness from parents and research that what if they don't know the right words to say? What if they don't have, the perfect way to say it? So this spot kind of addresses that fact. So let's go ahead and watch it now.
So I guess what I'm saying, bud, is your brain is still developing, and weed can mess with that. Did you know that teens who use cannabis are up to 2 times more likely to get depression? Should I be like serious dad?
How about just normal dad?
Conversations about weed don't have to be perfect.
Hey, son, you got a second to talk?
Learn more at ltcmainparents.com.
All right. So for this campaign, again, it's all about starting to have those conversations. We really wanted to make sure that audiences felt or they understood the importance of starting the conversation, again, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not exactly the way that you wanted it to go, because your kids are listening to you. We also know from research that parents are still the #1 influence in their child's life. So again, just having those conversations is important to start. For the supporting assets for this campaign, we wanted to make sure that throughout the messaging, we wanted to address the misconceptions that teens may have about cannabis. Some of the images to the right are like the questions that a teen really has. Does it ruin your mood? Is it safe for everyone? Is it medicinal? Things like that. And we also wanted to share with parents why it is important to start that conversation in general, give them the knowledge and tools that they need to have those conversations. And in research, this spot also did pretty well. It got a 3.32. Participants liked the attempt to talk to kids in you know, that practice of practicing in front of the mirror. Parents felt really relatable to that. They also found that the scenario between the parents seemed to be relatable as well. When the dad said, should I be cool, dad? And she's like, just be yourself, be a normal dad. Um, Participants felt very seen by that conversation and also, helped them be like, oh yeah, you know what, I can just be myself. They also felt like the kitchen was a common setting to hold important conversations with teens, especially while the parent is preparing dinner for their family. They were also able to share the other settings where communication could show a conversation between parents and children. Like in the third quote, it says, if we're just hanging out or watching football or TV, I'd shut it off and have the conversation. So this campaign also helped parents really feel like, oh, I can have the conversation anywhere. And then I think one of our last examples is the Ask campaign. This campaign is designed to help parents recognize that, again, they can have these conversations. Ask stands for Ask, Support, Know. It gives them tools on how to have the conversation in the first place. It is helping equip and empower parents to follow this model. That way they know exactly how to have those conversations. So let's go ahead and watch the video now.
You're the #1 influence on your child's behavior, so it's important you know what they're thinking about cannabis. But how do you find that out? Take a deep breath and ask. First, advise. You're their role model. Talk about risks in a judgment-free way. Support. Have open conversations. They're listening to you. Be sure to listen to them. Know. They should know your expectations and that you've got their backs. And if you've ever got questions, you can ask. Advise, support, know. For more tips, head to oasis.ny.gov/prevention.
So for this one, for parent messaging, again, we're really encouraging it's okay to have a conversation with your teen. Ask them what they know. Have that conversation, be that source of truth, be that advisor, be open, be non-judgmental. And one thing I do really love about this spot is it was created for the state of New York. And so we wanted to make sure that the visuals reflected the diversity within the state, especially the diversity within home units as well. So we provided a good variety of subjects in this video, and also we did create this in Spanish as well. And again, we know that dialects and ethnicities are important. So this one is coming from a little bit more of a Puerto Rican lens in terms of Spanish, just to make sure, again, we're authentically reaching our audiences. So let's go ahead and watch this now.
Eres la mayor influencia para tus hijos. Por eso es importante que sepas lo que ellos piensan sobre la marihuana. ¿Pero cómo? Respira profundo y aconseja. Háblales de los riesgos sin juzgarlos. Apoya. Ten conversaciones sinceras. Ellos te van a escuchar. Y averigua si ellos conocen tus expectativas. Y si alguna vez tienes dudas, respira y aconseja, apoya y averigua. Para más consejos, visita es.oasas.ny.gov/prevention.
And one thing that I would encourage within your own health communications, if there's ever a time that you are making something in a different language or for different types of audiences, I want to make sure that we are encouraging not just translation, but trans-adaption. As you can see in this one, it was not the Ask campaign, it was the AAA campaign for our Spanish audiences, because those were the words that made the most sense in terms of messaging. So again, we didn't want to just find a Spanish word that fit ASK. We wanted to make sure that we were authentically providing a campaign that our audiences could relate and resonate with. And so for this one, we did not develop research specifically for this campaign. We were able to build off of the current messaging and best practices and research that we've done with parents in the past. But in addition to this campaign, we also provided materials, which again, we want to make sure that we're equipping parents with resources so that they can have these conversations. So this is something that we do often like to develop for parents and adult role models. This gives parents access to examples on how to start those conversations, how we can be clear, and also addressing the challenges that they have with the teens in case they have pushback. So we have Q&A things or Q&A answers in these types of toolkits as well, which is something that I would encourage for you all as well. Alrighty. So I know that was a lot of information. We went through two types of audiences for teen prevention messaging. So just to kind of wrap it up and have some key learnings, these are the three bullet points that we'd really like you to keep with you in terms of teen messaging. So again, we want to make sure that we're keeping our messages in scope, those science-based, credible, open, pertinent, and empathetic. We always want to make sure that we are talking to our teens like adults, we're reaching them where they are and having that open conversation. We also want to clarify your cannabis education goals. Teens are all different, and especially teens when they are, starting susceptible non-triers to early experimenters. We want to make sure that we are addressing them where they're at in their cannabis experimentation area. And then also lastly, it's an emerging science. We must be patient, discerning, and proactive. Cannabis information, cannabis science and research is still developing. It is an ever-changing landscape in the United States. So we want to make sure that we are keeping our ears open and absorbing the information and also addressing and reacting to real-time cannabis information that's coming out. And then for our parent messaging, again, we want to make sure that we are reducing stigma by by moving beyond the developing behavioral awareness campaigns. We want to focus on health behavior change strategies. So again, instead of just telling people what to do, things like that, we want to make sure that we are addressing reasons, obstacles, real life experiences. And then we also want to make sure that we are using our decision blocks and strategic work framework to identify our audiences and what's blocking that healthy behavior change. And lastly, we always want to rely on the research. If possible, conduct formative research with your audience to identify what blocks exist and what needs to be addressed. If not, use the most recent, scholarly articles, data that's coming out. Again, we always want to make sure that we are relying heavily on our research when addressing audiences. Kristen, was there anything I missed?
No, I think that covers it. I also just want to recognize that a lot of the examples that we worked through today were, ad campaigns, but so much of the learnings in here are completely applicable for, in-school discussions, materials, working with youth engagement, or like youth councils. So we are here also for some Q&A. If you have specific questions on how you can take these learnings and apply it to your world within substance prevention, cannabis specifically, but very much so this can apply to other things as well. So
Yes, and if you do have any questions, we'd love for you to use the Q&A feature in the chat. Let me see if we have anything so far. All right, cool. Julie has sent in a question. She asked, have you devised ways to evaluate whether behavior change has occurred as a result of these campaigns? Yes, that is a great question. For a majority of our campaigns, we do conduct an evaluation. So we go ahead and take a sample of the population of our intended audience, and we test their knowledge, behaviors, norms, to make sure that we are seeing if behavior change happen, especially for the cannabis conversations. We ask, did this encourage you to have a conversation? Did you have a conversation? We also test statements as well, cannabis risk knowledge statements, to see if the perception of risk has gone up. So there's a variety of ways that we do test for both our parent and teen audiences. And we are very pleased to say that all of our campaigns have produced behavior change, which is amazing. And again, continuous messaging is the best messaging. So even though a campaign is over, continuing to push build on that messaging and encourage our audiences to have those conversations and for teens to learn the knowledge that they need to have to make informed decisions. Let's see. Any other questions that people would like to submit? Let me see. We have a question from Kristen. Are there programs that present these concerns to higher education settings?
So I can answer that question. We have created curriculum before within the context of some of our prevention campaigns. So curriculum that can be applicable to, physical education, biology, chemistry classes. In terms of higher education, I guess just maybe to clarify, or if the question is related to college age youth and young adults, we definitely have a whole other section that we could talk to you about with young adult use and making sure that if youth or young adults within a college setting or straight to work populations are using the cautions and harms of overuse, safe storage, things of that nature. But for the most part, we've been limited somewhat in just making sure that in an educational setting that parents or the teachers and folks involved are able and have the capacity to educate. So typically that's something that we would work with Missouri Department of Health with to make sure that those kind of materials are available. Hopefully that answers the question or helps.
Yeah. And then also we have a question from Aaron. The question is, do you have quantitative data on the actual change in the use of youth as a result of the campaigns? We do capture quantitative data as part of our evaluations. So depending on the campaign, and again for the state or the area that that campaign ran in, our sample sizes vary depending on the size of that campaign and area, but that is something that we do capture. So we do have quantitative data. At this point in time, I do not have that information off the top of my head for the campaigns that we presented. I do know that the campaigns did well. And again, there are questions of, have you reduced your use within, the last 30 days, or when was the last time that you used? Sometimes we do conduct pre-evaluations and post-evaluations. So before a campaign runs, we gauge to see what is the level of use, risk perceptions of our audiences before running that campaign. And then after, we will conduct another evaluation with not always the same participants, but the same sample size to see what has changed. And yes, so thankfully, as a result of this messaging, again, it is keeping those messages in scope, does tend to resonate with teens. Alrighty. And then I know Valerie posted a question in the webinar chat of what resources are available for parents to help have these conversations. For parent campaigns, we do always really encourage the use of those toolkits. We do typically make toolkits for our parent campaigns because it's one thing to encourage parents to have those conversations, but it's also another to help them have those conversations. And so the toolkit really goes in depth of, we offer fact sheets in there as well about, information on teens and cannabis, teens and cannabis mental health. And then we have those conversation guides of example questions a teen might have, or even rebuttals, and then example responses as well that parents can kind of customize as they need. And we do make the toolkits available for adult role models as well. It's not just through the parent lens. We want to make sure that we're also equipping our parents, mentors, coaches, anyone else who has influence over a teen's life with those answers that they can provide teens, because you never know when a teen is going to ask. All right. Does anybody, let's see. Okay, how would you approach youth that have little to no parent support or have family who use drugs? That is a really good question. We definitely take into account of ACEs when we are messaging to teens. We want to make sure that we are keeping in mind certain circumstances that a teen might face. Those campaigns are geared a little bit more towards those experimenters, as typically we've seen teens with higher ACEs have higher rates of usage. And so again, we are trying to appeal to we have certain campaigns that address using to cope. We have heard in research, and especially after COVID happened, that teens shifted from using just socially and to have fun into using to escape and to cope with problems that they might have or their circumstances. And so it is a different messaging category that we address. It still is pro-brain, but typically we rely on the mental health aspect, which is how cannabis can affect anxiety, your ability to process emotions, things like that, because typically teens who have higher sets of ACEs feel like weed or cannabis is helping them cope, when really it's making it can make their mental health worse and their ability to process those. So yeah, a little bit different type of messaging. Kristen, was there anything you wanted to jump in?
The only thing I'd say is that one of the spots that Sarah played earlier through our Hustle and Strive program is a pretty good example of how we would directly approach that, whether you have a youth program currently or you're working with mentors in the community. One of the speakers within that spot, his name's Kayvon, and he's actually he's an inspirational speaker that would go to the schools. And so the key piece there too is just as much engagement as possible. We use a lot of the SAMHSA protective factors within the construct of that messaging. So we know that mentors of any shape and form can help promote resilience, making sure that they stay focused and dedicated to their long-term goals. Resilience and grit is another big component. So that Hustle and Strive program, if you're interested, we'd be happy to share more about kind of how it worked. But it really just installed these lessons of grit, resilience, and then we used micro influencers and mentors within the actual community and continued to engage them through this long-term intervention. So I'd say that as much engagement as possible and incorporating mentors where you have the option to do that. I see another question here, Sarah. Obviously, you can make a video for a particular audience. How do you ensure you hit that audience and not a different one? That's a great question. That is kind of the number one thing that we do worry about when it comes to our campaigns is that we are reaching the right group. So there's a variety of different ways that we're doing that. We look at susceptibility rates, cannabis use rates within the actual statewide data that's available to us. And then based on that, we're also able to look at the audience sizes within the media platforms that exist. So we're pairing a bunch of different data sources together to make sure that when we are serving ads, we're really making sure that we're being intentional on who we're reaching and making sure that we're prioritizing those who are at the highest risk. I think a lot of other pieces that, would factor into the response on that question too is this all starts with research and making sure that our ideal audience that needs to see this message the most sees themselves within the content, because we want them to pay attention to it and not make it feel like it's not for me. So there's a variety of different things that we do. Another thing that we look at is just age. So making sure that we're segmenting ads and content based on age. So there's a lot of different things that come together. And then where possible, working within the actual community itself. So counties, community-based organizations, different groups who exist to make sure that we are being as intentional and engaging as possible outside of just media. So that might, for example, include things like events and identifying events where we might see higher rates of kind of pro cannabis use, and just making sure that there is an ability to, do outreach in a way that doesn't feel like it's cheesy and just someone being the buzzkill in the concert venue, but really just imparting that objective, neutral information so they are empowered with the information. So there's a variety of different ways we do that. But the good news is that within our evaluation data, we are making sure that as we measure our campaigns, we're screening for people who are actually susceptible. And if they're susceptible or actively experimenting, that is who we are recruiting. And then we look at awareness rates and shifts in knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs based on that initial screener. So from point A to point Z, we make sure that that is reinforced and optimizing accordingly wherever we possibly can. So hopefully that helps.
And then I also wanted to say that I dropped an example of one of the campaigns that we showed, which was the Awkward is Okay. That is one of the more recent toolkits that we made for our parents. So that is the link for that website, and you can go ahead and download the toolkit if you're curious to see what those kind of example conversations look like. Let's see. Can we ask about what they need or some of, oh, okay, let's see. Um, yes. Is there any other questions that we have from the audience? Is there anything else that we can provide? Any other resources, examples, things like that?
We're here to learn and listen too. So if there are specific examples, I know one thing that keeps coming up in all of our work within the cannabis space are things like Delta 8 and synthetic marijuana and hemp and all of the different pieces. So we are here as open resources as well, just to share with you anything that we have learned or are actively learning within the space. So there's no wrong answer. You can also submit anonymously if you like, or reach out to one of us after the presentation is complete. So one of the questions here in the chat is, do you know where I could find pamphlets with information that could be shared with teens about the risks? So I don't know, Sarah, do these Let's Talk Cannabis toolkits that you included have anything youth facing, or would we be able to send something out?
Yeah, that is a great question. For the toolkits, we do have the subsection of fact sheets, and that is included in the current website that I sent over. There's two fact sheets for that, a teen and mental health, and then Cannabis 101. Those were designed to equip parents with information, but they are open to use for teens as well. It's not like there's specific language of talking to your teens, I believe, in those ones. Those are kind of just general fact sheets that people can use. So yeah, teens and cannabis and mental health, and then the Cannabis 101 worksheet, which should be in that link that I sent as well. Let's see.
You've been able to look into perceptions and risk factors between any use of high dose THC products. Can you guys answer? Yes, we absolutely can. So in terms of risk factors of any use and high dose THC products, one of the things that we tend to see is higher rates of, I think Sarah mentioned, adverse childhood experiences. So the more adverse childhood experiences a youth has, that tends to be somewhat of an indicator or a proxy that we use to just better understand the potential susceptibility of cannabis use. Another thing is that when we look at the differences between any use and use of dose THC products, there tends to be multiple products also happening at the same time, and making sure that we also are supplying those folks too with resources, going back to some of those decision blocks we talked about. So making sure that they have solutions and materials and not, for lack of a better word, cessation resources, but substance prevention, substance counseling to help them. And then the other piece is that we tend to see a lot of similarities just in terms of risk factors with that overlap quite a bit with just our vaping work. So rural mental health, LGBT, those who are challenged with mental health and substance use disorder, or sorry, mental health. And the other piece that I was just going to mention was, if sometimes what we also use as a proxy is just understanding within their peer groups and their communities within their family settings or at like their at home settings, or within their friend group if there's a lot of use, because we do see that use increases if you're around folks where it's really normalized at the community level. So just those are some proxies that we also use to better understand high risk, and then that trajectory to just around age. If you start using before the age of 15, there are increased chances that your frequency of use and dependency of that use will continue to go up over time. So really it's kind of like you're creating this rewiring of your brain the earlier that you start, is really what we're seeing just in terms of risk factors. So hopefully that helps answer the question, and that helps provide you all with some additional insight too on what we tend to see within cannabis use as a youth behavior.
See, what are other states seeing as negatives that are attributed to legalization of cannabis or recreational use of adults? That's a good question. I know for certain states, for the state of Hawaii right now, they're going into legislation to, and a lot of states right now are leaning towards legalization. Again, the landscape is ever changing. So there are some concerns about not having foundational work or foundational knowledge to audiences in general for those states who are recently or about to legalize. So that is something that we definitely want to make sure that we are getting ahead of. That information is out and foundational. Also, let me just read this one more time. As negatives attributed to legalization.
I'd say the other thing is just a lot of misinformation. Whenever a state goes through legalization, there's just a lot of misconceptions around what it means. Where are you allowed to use? And so I think making sure that adults and parents are equipped with all of the correct information. Another piece that I would also just say is starting to come up a lot more because of the vast proliferation of products that exists from, THC Doritos to gummies, is safe storage. These products literally look like child's candy, and they can. There's drinks, there's all these different, products that exist. And I'd say, coming from a variety of different states that have like pretty pro cannabis norms, I'd say one of the other watch outs is just making sure that you're fully aware of like the safe storage possibilities, but then also even within adults in your own community, making sure that the education is also there about cannabis use disorder. In the state of Maine, there's some pretty high rates of cannabis use disorder that were unexpected until it just came out in a statewide survey. And then when we started talking to young adults and really helping them understand what are the symptoms of cannabis use disorder, um, it was this kind of moment of like, oh my gosh, I didn't know A, that was a thing, or B, that it could happen to me. And so just making sure that there is just a lot of more education out there, both for adults, but then also for when we're thinking about the context of youth, because youth see a lot, and the, social media landscape does not make it easy for us as we're navigating this, because so much of the accessibility of these products can come from dispensaries. It can also happen on things like Snapchat. And we see social media use being a really big access point for youth. And that all starts too with just parents and adults of legal age also having the right information and education.
And then I think we have one more question of what is rescue agency's opinion and or stance on terminology used for cannabis? This is a great question. For the history of cannabis and the term cannabis versus marijuana, I know that there has been some conversation, and especially in certain states. I know that the states Washington, Maine, and Virginia have moved away from the term marijuana and instead have only used or decided to only use the word cannabis moving forward, especially in government groups, paperwork, things like that, any official press from the government. There is kind of a background or conversation happening that maybe the term marijuana specifically can have some racist undertones, and that's why cannabis should be only used instead. This is a very complicated history, especially around the terminology. Specifically, the reason why the term marijuana was introduced into the United States in the first place was, like Kristen was mentioning in her earlier slide, back during the Reefer Madness era, there was, fear mongering around certain populations using cannabis in general. And using the word marijuana as a way to make it sound a little bit more foreign, a little bit scarier to United States audiences and populations. So there is a history around this term that has been hurtful in the past to minority populations, but also in terms of authentic representation and use when we are creating campaigns for Hispanic audiences. Marijuana is a Spanish word, it's marijuana. And so we do want to make sure that we are approaching our audiences in the language and way that they're used to talking. Cannabis also as a term in general, especially for teens, is seen as a little bit more formal, and they would prefer, weed or something a little bit more colloquial, even marijuana for themselves. So it's kind of depending on what audience you're talking to, For parents, using cannabis is absolutely fine and normal. Again, for Spanish audiences, I would probably encourage the use of the word marijuana, despite its history, because that is most authentic to them. So yeah, a lot of background on terminology and this word. So for us, it's definitely approaching the audience with the language and way that they want to be spoken to is how we see things. Let's see. We've seen college students. Oh, sorry. Did you want to mention?
I was just gonna respond to that. They know the term weed. Yes, I have heard that. And I think the other piece that we're continuing to learn is that there's so many different ways that teens describe and young adults describe marijuana, and weed. One of the things that we're hearing right now in the state of Virginia, just as context, we've been facilitating community advisory boards and youth focus groups. The term za is actually the up and coming term. Like, no one uses weed anymore. And so just making sure that we're constantly putting our ear to the ground and also aware of emojis that are being used to depict weed. There's a lot of code sometimes that's used. So yeah, I think it just depends. Cannabis in it of itself is more of like a technical scientific term. And then when we're talking to parents, there's probably going to be a certain word that we would suggest using. And cannabis is usually it in most states. But then when we're talking to teens about weed or za or marijuana, it really just depends on like the regional nuances too of a state, and what is kind of the thing of the moment. But it's youth are fun. They really keep you on your toes, I will say. Emojis that are used. Oh gosh. Maybe
There's
Sarah
like
can pull up the deck. Or if you have there like wind, the little leaves. What else? Like anything with greenery, basically.
like the maple leaf, the three leaves falling. Yeah,
Three leaf
like
falling,
the
yeah.
puff of smoke. Let me see if I can pull up.
Another interesting one, just while we're on interesting use of emojis, is blue cap. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a blue cap on social media, but we started seeing a lot of responses on our cannabis prevention work with just a blue cap, and that was the only response. And come to find out that it means or resembles like no cap, which means that's a lie. And so it's just decoding what youth are saying and how they're using these emojis has just been really interesting. Um, Oh, looks like it's probably, yeah, marijuana slang. And then I know that and there you go. You have all of these interesting emojis in here as well. Thank you for posting that, Molly.
Definitely interesting to see and research what comes out. This is a question we always ask, like, what terminology do you use? Are there any emojis you use? And so we do get a variety of answers, and we also see, the little puff, the leaves, pretty often. All right, I know we are coming to a close. We have about 1 minute left. So I wanted to give it back to Anna in case there was anything that you wanted to wrap us up with.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen and Sarah. Really appreciate you both sharing these valuable messaging strategies, and all these insights with us. Audience, thank you for participating in today's training. We will be sending out all the resources today, along with those key learnings that were discussed. As we wrap up, I did want to mention that we will be offering another free virtual cannabis training with the Rescue Agency before those statewide campaigns are launched. So information regarding the date, time, and the learning topics will be available soon, and we will be sure to get that out to everyone. But for now, if anyone has any further questions or would like any more information, please feel free to reach out to either one of our speakers or myself. And just thank you once again for participating, and having a willingness to learn about this important and relevant topic. And we look forward to hosting the next training session and posting that open registration. That will be out soon. So have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and thank you again.